My name is Evelyn Carter, and last year, I became one of the richest women in Missouri, though no one in my family knew it. The day I held that winning Powerball ticket, I felt my hands tremble so hard I thought I might faint. $333 million, a number too big to even say out loud. I tucked the ticket inside my Bible, right between the pages where my late husband's favorite verse was marked. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. But that verse started to feel like a question instead of comfort. Whose heart did I still have left? 2 months later, I got my answer. My heart medication was running out, and for the first time in years, I decided not to refill it myself. I wanted to see if anyone would notice, if my children, Lauren or Michael, would care enough to ask. I called my daughter first. The phone rang 5 times before she picked up. "Mom, I'm in a meeting," she said, her voice tight. I don't have enough to cover my pills this month," I said quietly. She sighed. "You should really apply for assistance. Mom, I can't just drop everything." And then the line went dead. I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, the old coffee pot steaming, the house too quiet. I wanted to believe she'd call back, that maybe she'd misunderstood. She didn't. That night, as I sat alone with my untouched tea, a new thought settled in. If love only shows up when you have nothing, then maybe I'd finally learn who truly loved me. And I was right, but not in the way I expected. The morning after my daughter hung up, the world felt quieter than usual. The kettle hissed on the stove, and I could hear the clock ticking behind me like it was counting the seconds I'd wasted waiting for her call. I checked my phone again. Nothing. No text, no missed call, not even a half-hearted apology. I poured the tea I never really wanted, set it down on the table, and looked at the list of numbers on my notepad. Lauren. Michael. I'd tried both. I told myself maybe they were busy, maybe I'd caught them on a bad day. But then I remembered the tone in Lauren's voice, how impatience came easier to her than kindness, and the silence that followed when Michael promised he'd call right back. The house creaked as if it shared my disappointment. At noon, the phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my throat tighten. Noah, my grandson. "Hey, Grandma," he said, cheerful and a little breathless, like he'd just come off a shift. "Mom told me you were having some trouble with your meds?" I hesitated. "Oh, she mentioned it, did she?" "Yeah, I just wanted to check if you're okay. I can send you some money until you get things sorted." I could picture his face, the boy who used to climb my apple tree and bring me bruised fruit like they were gold. "You don't need to do that," I said. "I want to," he insisted. "I can drive down this weekend too. It's been forever." It was 400 miles. He'd have to miss work, burn gas he could barely afford. I told him not to, but he said, "You always came when I was sick, Grandma. Let me do that for you once." After the call, I sat there for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space he'd left behind. A small spark lit somewhere inside me, something between gratitude and anger. Gratitude for Noah, anger at what his parents had become. That night, I opened the locked drawer under my bed and pulled out the envelope that held the Powerball ticket. I traced the numbers with my thumb, then folded it back carefully. Maybe money didn't change people, it just peeled the paint off. I decided that if love couldn't be proven by words, it would be tested by action. The next morning, I went to my bank and met with a quiet woman named Miss Gomez, an attorney who'd helped me manage the winnings through a trust. "I want to do something," I told her. "Something personal. Not with the foundation, just within my family." She tilted her head. "You mean a gift?" "Not exactly," I said. "A test." She smiled politely, maybe thinking I was eccentric. I asked her about how to protect my estate if I happened to make certain people unhappy. She drafted a note, a few forms, and told me she could set up everything privately. That weekend, Noah arrived in an old sedan that sounded like it was gasping for air. He brought me a bag of groceries, bread, soup, my favorite tea, and the $400 he'd promised, folded neatly in an envelope. He refused to take no for an answer. We cooked dinner together, the way I used to with his grandfather. He told me about his classes, about a girl he liked but couldn't afford to take out. I listened, watching the way he avoided looking at his phone every few minutes like the rest of his generation. When I slipped the car keys into his pocket later that night, he looked at me in shock. "Grandma, I can't take your car," he said. "Yes, you can." I told him, "It's old, but it runs better than that thing you drove here in. Consider it a loaner." He hugged me, hard enough to make my ribs ache. After he left, I sat on the porch and waited. It didn't take long. Lauren called first, her voice sharp. "Did you give Noah your car? Are you losing it?" "Mom," I said softly, "I gave him something he earned." There was a pause, then the old familiar sound of disapproval. "You always favored him." The call ended like the last one, cold, abrupt. That was when I realized this wasn't just about disappointment anymore. It was about proof. Proof of love, proof of character, proof that the fortune sitting quietly in my account would go to the one person who still remembered what family meant. The test had just begun. The following week, I found myself sitting across from Ms. Gomez again. She was younger than my children, polite, but with that measured tone lawyers use when they're not sure if they're talking to a client or a ticking bomb. I told her I wanted to create a separate trust, one that would pass quietly, directly, without my children's involvement. She adjusted her glasses. "You want it to go to your grandson?" I nodded. "He's the only one who came when I called for help. That tells me everything I need to know." Ms. Gomez hesitated. "I can arrange that, Mrs. Carter, but it might create tension in the family." I smiled. Tension already exists. This will just make it honest. When I left her office, the wind had picked up, carrying the dry leaves down Main Street. I stood there for a moment, watching them swirl, and thought about how easily things scatter when no one's paying attention. Money, love, families. That weekend, Lauren stopped by unannounced. I thought for a fleeting second she'd come to apologize, but she didn't. She came to ask about the car. "Did you really give Noah your Buick?" she demanded, standing in my doorway with a latte in her hand. "I did," I said calmly. "It was just sitting in the garage. Mom, he's 22. Now, you could have given it to Michael. He has a baby on the way." "Michael hasn't spoken to me in weeks," I replied. Lauren shook her head. "You're being manipulated. He's using you. He knows you're sentimental." Her words stung, but not because they were true, because I used to say them about her father's relatives when they borrowed money and never paid back. She looked around my living room like she was auditing it. "You should let me help you manage things. You're not as sharp as you used to be. Mom, what if someone takes advantage of you?" I realized then what this was really about. She wasn't worried about me losing money. She was worried about not knowing where it was. After she left, I called Ms. Gomez again. "Let's move faster," I said. We set everything up within 2 weeks, a private trust in Noah's name, with conditions that he'd complete college, maintain good standing, and continue community work. If he ever strayed into trouble, the trust would freeze automatically. It wasn't about control. It was about teaching him the value of the gift he hadn't even asked for. Still, a thought kept nagging at me. What if Lauren or Michael tried to challenge it later? I asked Ms. Gomez that exact question. She replied, "They'd need to prove you were incompetent or coerced, but we can protect against that too. Get a medical evaluation, a statement of mental capacity, even a video testimony if you like." The idea felt strange at first, but I did it anyway. I sat in my doctor's office under the sterile light, answering memory questions like a school exam. Then Ms. Gomez filmed me reading a short statement that I knew exactly what I was doing and why. My voice didn't waver once. Later that night, Noah called again. He'd gotten the car registered and sent me a photo of himself standing next to it, grinning wide, one hand lifted like a little boy showing off his first bike. That picture stayed on my fridge for weeks. Meanwhile, Lauren's calls grew more frequent and colder. She started hinting that maybe she and Michael should help me with my finances, that it wasn't safe for someone my age to handle things alone. One evening, I overheard her voice on speakerphone when she forgot to hang up. "If we can get power of attorney, we can make sure everything's handled properly," she was saying to Michael. "Before she does something crazy." Something in me snapped then. Not rage, but clarity. I hired a private investigator the next morning. His name was Henry, an old friend of my husband's from the police department. He didn't ask many questions, just nodded and said, "You want to know what they're planning?" A week later, he brought me a small file, no thicker than a church bulletin. Inside were screenshots, recorded messages, even a printed email from Lauren to a financial advisor asking how to initiate a guardianship review for an elderly parent. I read every word, my hands shaking only once, not because I was surprised, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. That night, I sat in my kitchen, the envelope of evidence beside my tea. I thought about how my children used to fight over crayons, then about how they now circled around money the same way. Some lessons, it seemed, were never learned. I looked at the calendar. Christmas was 2 weeks away. If they wanted a meeting about money, they were about to get one, just not the kind they expected. Christmas came with the first snow of the year. The streets were silver and quiet, the kind of quiet that used to make me think of my husband humming carols while he fixed the porch lights. Now the house just echoed with the sound of one clock and the hum of the heater. I set the table for 4, out of habit, not hope. Noah arrived first, carrying a pie he'd baked himself. He kissed my cheek and said, "Smells like Christmas here, Grandma." His smile did something to the air. It softened it. Lauren and Michael came an hour late, together. They didn't bring gifts, but they brought tension. I could feel it before the door even shut behind them. Lauren's first words were, "We need to talk about your finances. Mom." I motioned for them to sit. "We'll talk," I said. But after dinner, we ate in near silence. Noah tried to fill the space with small talk about his classes, his job, the car. Lauren rolled her eyes every time he spoke. Michael stared at his phone, typing between bites. The mashed potatoes went cold before anyone finished their plate. When the plates were cleared, I poured coffee for everyone and set a single envelope in the center of the table. "I asked you all here tonight," I began, "because it's time we stop pretending." Lauren crossed her arms. "Pretending about what?" "About who we are," I said. I opened the envelope and slid a piece of paper toward them. "Do you know what this is?" Michael glanced down and frowned. "Lottery claim form?" "That's right," I said. 8 months ago, I won $333 million. The silence that followed was the kind you could almost hear breaking. Lauren laughed, short and nervous. "You're joking." I shook my head. "No joke. I claimed it quietly. Ms. Gomez helped me set up a trust. No one knew, except now. You do." Michael's phone clattered onto the table. "You've had that kind of money all this time?" "Yes." And you still asked for help with your medication? Lauren's voice rose. I needed to know who'd stand by me when I had nothing. I said, now I know. She stood up. That's manipulative. Mom, who does that to their own kids? Someone who spent 40 years doing everything for them, I replied. Someone who wanted to see if any of it meant something beyond a checkbook. Lauren's face flushed red. So what now? You planning to cut us out completely? I reached for the second envelope and laid it beside the first. Not quite. Inside, you'll find your mortgage and credit card debts, all paid in full last week. Her expression faltered. You paid them? Yes, but you'll also find a new agreement. It's a promissory note, 10% interest, due in 2 years. She blinked, stunned. You're lending us money at interest? I'm giving you a chance to repay what you owe, to me and maybe to yourselves. Michael finally spoke. This is insane. No, I said softly. This is accountability. Noah sat quietly through it all, eyes wide but calm. I looked at him then, the only one whose gaze didn't flicker toward the money. I reached for the third folder, the thick one. There's something else, I said, pushing it toward him. This is the Carter Foundation. It's a trust that will support elderly people abandoned by their families. You'll be the director when you graduate. Lauren scoffed. You're leaving everything to him? I'm entrusting everything to him, I corrected. Because he remembered love when you both forgot it. Michael pushed back his chair. You've lost your mind. I met his stare. If that's true, you can take me to court. But before you do, ask your lawyer about this. I slid the final paper across the table, a notarized declaration of mental competence, signed by my doctor, my attorney, and witnessed on video. He froze. Lauren went pale. The air in the room shifted. Anger, disbelief, something close to fear. Finally, Lauren whispered, You really planned all this? Yes, I said, because you forced me to. Noah looked at me, quietly shaking his head. Grandma. I smiled at him. Don't worry, sweetheart. This isn't revenge. It's a lesson. Lauren stood, trembling. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll regret it with peace. She stormed out, Michael behind her. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames. For a long time, only the ticking clock remained. Noah reached across the table, took my hand, and said softly, You did the right thing. I looked at the snow falling outside, slow and endless. Right or wrong, I whispered. It's done. And in that quiet, for the first time in years, I felt free. It's been a year since that Christmas night. The snow has long melted, but the silence that followed never really left. Lauren and Michael stopped calling for months. At first, it hurt, worse than I expected. You raise children, you wipe their tears, and one day you realize the only tears left are your own. But pain has a way of settling into wisdom if you let it breathe. Noah came every weekend that winter. He shoveled the driveway, fixed the porch steps, and talked about turning the foundation into something bigger. We spent evenings going over his plans, part scholarships for nursing students who volunteer with the elderly, part financial aid for seniors who can't afford their prescriptions. It wasn't just charity, it was redemption. When spring came, he moved the foundation's small office into an old church downtown. The first day we opened, 2 women came in, a widow and her sister, asking for help with rent. I wrote the check myself, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like my money was finally serving the right purpose. In June, Lauren showed up. She didn't come to argue. She came alone, holding a small envelope and a bouquet of lilies, my favorite. I paid off part of the note. she said quietly, placing the envelope on the table. And I started volunteering at one of Noah's clinics. I wanted to be angry still, but the look in her eyes, the same blue as her father's, softened me. I nodded and said, "It's a start." She smiled, barely, but it was enough. Michael hasn't come around yet. Maybe he never will. But I've stopped waiting. Some nights, when the house is quiet again. I sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the lights from the foundation's office glow across the street. I think of the girl I used to be, the one who believed love was owed just because she gave it. I know better now. Money didn't change who I was. It just revealed who everyone else had been all along, and that truth, as heavy as it once felt, has finally set me free. Some people say winning the lottery changes your life. They're right, just not in the way they think. It doesn't turn you into someone new. It simply strips away the noise and shows you who's been standing beside you all along, and who's been waiting for you to fall. When the news of my fortune finally made its way around town, neighbors I hadn't seen in years started waving again. Old friends mailed cards, some with congratulations, some with quiet curiosity. But what struck me most wasn't who appeared, it was who didn't. My children stayed away that whole summer. Lauren sent short updates through Noah, always polite, never personal. Michael didn't answer calls. And yet, I didn't feel bitter anymore. I'd spent so many years twisting myself into a shape they could love, softening my words, shrinking my needs, pretending their neglect was just busyness. I was done with that. Freedom, I've learned, doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like peace, a silence that doesn't ache anymore. The foundation grew faster than any of us expected. Noah's passion drew in volunteers, local nurses, church members. We partnered with a small clinic and paid for hundreds of prescriptions that seniors would have otherwise gone without. Every receipt, every thank you note felt like a small apology from the world. One evening, as the sun was setting, Noah came by with 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside me on the porch, the same spot where his grandfather used to tell stories about hope and fairness. He said, "Grandma, do you ever regret it? The way you handled everything?" I looked at him, the boy who had become a man without losing his kindness, and said, "No. If I'd given them money out of guilt, it would have been wasted. But giving them truth, maybe that still has a chance to grow." He nodded, quiet for a while, then smiled. "You really did win, didn't you?" I laughed softly. Not the way the world counts winning, but yes, I think I did. The next morning, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a check, exactly the amount Lauren still owed, with a note in her handwriting. "Thank you for making me earn this." For the first time in a long while, tears came easy. Not the heavy kind, but the kind that cleans. That night, I walked through the small garden behind my house, the wind stirring the chimes we'd hung decades ago. I thought of my husband, of the life we built, of the children we raised, and of the quiet justice that had finally found its place. They say money can't buy happiness. That's true. But it can buy time. The time you need to see people clearly, to forgive them without letting them back in, to build something that matters beyond yourself. As I turned off the porch light and headed inside, I glanced once more at the foundation's glow across the street. The sign read, "The Carter Foundation, Hope Has No Price." And in that moment, I realized what my fortune had really given me wasn't wealth, it was peace. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family, drama, and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.